Ladies, gentlemen, and raiders of all Ark, there's a lot of uncertainty in Ark Raiders. There's of course the uncertainty of whether to trust other raiders or not, but there's also a ton of uncertainty related to the various systems and mechanics, especially around looting, and even more so when it comes to blueprints specifically, which are arguably the most sought after category of item in the game, pretty much the rarest one as well, and it seems to have some sort of hidden factors that decide whether you even can find some blueprints to begin with, and in some cases just changing the weighting or drop chances based on how you go about looking for them. So today I'm going to go over the things that we know 100% affect blueprint drop chances, the things that we are probably about 95% or so sure, just because we've seen enough data that it would be weird if it wasn't. Then we'll go over a few main things that I've heard talked about in the community and go over my thoughts on how true they are or aren't 1 month into the game, hundreds of hours of gameplay with 3 separate people on this channel all melding our minds together, and so I'm going to talk about our experiences in relation to a few main factors. The specific map that you're on, the loot zone quality like yellow or red loot zones as an example, the loot container type like residential containers versus tech containers or things like that, the major map condition that is active while you are looking for the item as well, and also finally sort of just like weird stuff, which I know of one that absolutely I am pretty much all but confirmed upon, but I'm still hoping the community can help me find out if there are more like that. First up though, let's go back over the stuff that we know to be true. Blueprints can drop from pretty much anywhere in the game, in nearly every container type, though there does seem to be a few exceptions that just can't drop blueprints. That said, there are a few container types that are generally accepted to have higher blueprint drop rates, being weapon cases, buried caches, medical duffel bags, grenade cases, and the little black boxes that people started to call blueprint boxes. That said, the main thing that defines blueprint drop chances seems to be density of containers, rather than specific types of container. The raider containers are the exception to that, but density is the big deal, as the trick is to simply look in as many lootable locations as you can in as short a time as possible, rather than only ever opening high value containers very rarely and never checking anything else. Blueprints drop relatively frequently from trials rewards when you complete the 3-star ratings of each one each week. Blueprints drop relatively frequently from surveyors, which are the big heavily armored ball arc that roll around outdoors and require a lot of shooting to get through. Aside from that, blueprint drop chances seem heavily increased in places that require some sort of extra effort to get into. If a room has a breachable door as its only entrance, or if that room requires some kind of parkour or jumping to get into and there's no other way to enter that room, those areas all have increased loot quality in general that seemingly also applies to blueprint drop chances. An easy example is the pharmacies on Buried City, which I frequently hear people say they get lots of blueprints from, and those are basically just an entire multi-story building of multiple loot containers where everything counts as being in a breach room. As well, I consistently hear people say that locked rooms that require keys to get into, and that puzzle rooms like the puzzles on Bluegate have increased blueprint drop chances too, and while initially I did agree with that concept, over time I think my perception is shifting a little bit. Take this with a grain of salt of course, but I've started to lean towards thinking that that is not that those rooms specifically have increased drop rates, so much as those types of rooms are places that very frequently have higher chances of the high drop rate containers, like weapon cases, grenade cases, and those types of things. So I don't think it's necessarily that the rooms have higher drop rates as a whole, so much as they just have more containers that have higher drop rates. And I know that's a bit semantic, but it is an important distinction to understand. Aside from that then, not all blueprints that exist in the blueprint list are available properly in the game right now. Not everything that components exist for and say that they can be used to craft can currently be crafted. To explain what I mean by this a little bit more, the deadline mine is listed on this item, and it's probably the best example. The deadline mine is super strong. People would love to have the ability to craft these at will. They are very, 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 very good, and we know that its blueprint technically does exist in the files because it was one of the 6 blueprints that were added to the total after patch 1.2, and because there are crafting resources in that list that the deadline mine is a thing that they are used to craft. Despite this, not a single player has reported finding a deadline mine blueprint in game. I've not seen even one singular person say that they have. Not by searching the internet, not by asking people about it, not a single one. Embark has not responded about this at all, but it seems almost guaranteed that the blueprint for this item just is not currently available in the game. There's a chance this is some sort of bug or mistake and it will just be fixed at some point, but the longer that we go without the developers actively responding and admitting that, the more I think that it's probably like the Aphelion blueprint, where it simply was not dropping until they made it start dropping in patch 1.3. The patch note saying that they increased drop rates for the Aphelion blueprint, it went from literally 0% before the patch to 100% after the patch, patch from the Matriarch's core. So currently my line of thinking is that the other new blueprints like that, the ones that have been inaccessible from launch as well, are all likely just tied to events or map conditions that don't exist, or need to be properly activated behind the scenes by the developers to make them actually start showing up. I want to be as clear as possible as we get into the next part of this that I will do my best not to talk in absolutes, because none of these things are things that we can know as 100% fact. We are just making our most educated guesses based on all the information available. That said, 3 items were on that list of blueprints that technically existed but weren't dropping for players at all, and have left that list over the previous few weeks. These are the blueprint for the Tempest weapon, the blueprint for the Vulcano weapon, and the blueprint for the Bobcat weapon. People hadn't found a single one of these blueprints for a period of time after the game released, quite a fair one as well. Then people started finding Vulcano blueprints at a very specific point in time, which will make more sense in a moment when we get to it. Then Tempest and Bobcat blueprints seem to have started appearing as of the 1.2 patch, when they added Stella Montis as a map to the game. I've been keeping a close eye on any place that I can see players talking about getting any of these blueprints because of how rare they seem to be, and I've come to a few important conclusions here. First thing worth noting that will help set the stage for this is major map conditions. We recently did a bunch of testing with electromagnetic storms specifically, and came to the conclusion that the storm event seems to have increased blueprint drop chances compared to normal for whatever reason, even though it does not state that it does on the description. From our testing and general community response to our findings, it seems like day raids have the lowest blueprint drop rate chances, night raids are a decent chunk higher than day raids, and electromagnetic storm seems to be even higher than that, or at least equal to night raids. But one note here before you start saying, well, most of my blueprints were found during the day. Well, the majority of your raids probably have been day raids because of the way that the game functions. You don't always have access to night, you don't always have access to storm, but you do always have access to day. That said, what we're trying to base it off is a sort of a blueprint success rate, how many blueprints you find over the course of how many raids. Point being, electromagnetic storm definitely has higher blueprint drop rates. But while we were doing this, we also noticed another pattern, which was finding an abnormally large amount of snaphook blueprints, which we had found 0 of before we did this. None of us had seen a single one before, and in testing the electromagnetic storm, I think we found a total of 5 snaphook blueprints between the 3 of us, 2 of which were not only in the same raid, but literally 5 feet away from each other in 2 containers that were beside each other. I did some more research and found other people saying that they found snaphook blueprints and saying where/when, and found that most of them were also saying in the electromagnetic storm in various places, in various locations, but it was almost always during the storm. Not literally all of them, but most of them, which led to my next conclusion. Snaphook blueprints seem intrinsically tied to the electromagnetic storm map condition. You can find them in other places at other times, but they definitely have an increased drop rate during the storm based on all reports of finding them that I'm aware of. If we assume that that is true, based on that logic, it makes sense that there should be more blueprints that act like this for other map conditions, or at least that it is possible that's the case. So I started looking at how people had found other rare blueprints and noticed some really interesting patterns here. The Tempest blueprint, I have only ever seen people say that they found this during night raids, not during storm, not during day, not during any other major map condition, only during night raids. I've heard people say multiple different maps, multiple locations within those maps, so the map is clearly not a factor. The location isn't really a factor. I've heard multiple different types of containers, so the container type also doesn't seem to be that much of a factor. The only thing that seems to matter is that every single one I've seen reported was during a night raid. So the first conclusion today, the first new one, is that it seems like the Tempest blueprint is either only available during night raids, or is so heavily weighted towards dropping in night raids as opposed to other raid types that we've just not happened to find someone who has done that yet. So Tempest seems tied to the night raid major map condition, but the next 2 are where it gets even more interesting, because once Tempest blueprints started dropping, which happened with patch 1.2, I saw people talking about them dropping very, very frequently, whereas the Vulcano and the Bobcat blueprints, while I am certain their blueprints are dropping, I have seen players report that they have dropped, I've seen a very, very low number of people say they have them in comparison, as well as where they got them and how, of course. But every single person that I have heard say that they found the Vulcano blueprint has said they found it during the hidden bunker major map condition on Spaceport. Not just only on Spaceport in general, but specifically the major map condition. So the map itself doesn't seem to be the main factor here. It is the condition itself, which is hidden bunker. The blueprint can spawn in the bunker itself, but it also seems to be able to spawn anywhere else on the map during hidden bunker, based on what people have said too. I've not seen a single person claim to find this blueprint on any other map or during any other weather condition. So again, my conclusion here is that the Vulcano blueprint either only drops during the hidden bunker event on Spaceport, or is weighted so heavily towards dropping it in a hidden bunker and then just has such a low drop chance anywhere else that I've not seen someone claim to have found it. Then we have the Bobcat blueprint, which is by far the rarest one that is confirmed to currently be in the game from what I can tell, because of what it seems to be tied to, which is the locked gate major map condition on Blue Gate. If you're asking what that is, I can't really blame you, because it doesn't currently exist in the rotation of events in the game. It was added to the game very quietly with the patch 1.2 update that added Stella Montis, but after only actually being active maybe like a handful of times, they removed it from the game, and it has not happened since. The general reasoning that I've seen for this is that it was bugged and there was no proper reward, so they took it out of the rotation to fix it. But during that time, there was a handful of event periods, and those were the only times that people have ever reported finding blueprints for the Bobcat. Literally the only ones I have ever heard of. So if we accept that snaphook blueprints have increased drop chances tied to Storm, seemingly even further increased because Storm itself has bonus blueprint drop rates, which is why they seem so weirdly common now, then it makes sense to accept that the Tempest blueprint probably has the same conditions for night raids, maybe even being fully exclusive to night raids, but that is pretty hard to confirm. If we can accept that, it is then logical to say the same thing is true of the Vulcano blueprint being tied to the hidden bunker event on Spaceport specifically, and then the final step being Bobcat blueprint being tied to the locked gate event, which is not currently existing, which makes it very, very hard to confirm. But hopefully it will be back sooner rather than later, and I think all of this somewhat supports my theory that some of the currently unobtainable blueprints are likely tied to major map conditions that just are not a part of the game right now. That said, I sort of speed ran through some of the conclusions I made during that, but from what I can tell, there is not really a thing about specific blueprints only existing on certain maps over others. Same with loot zone quality. I found way more blueprints in unmarked loot areas than I have in a yellow or red loot zone, and there's the argument that that might be because there are way more areas of loot in the game that aren't in those zones than the ones that are, but I think it's fair to say that there are sessions where I actively focus on yellow or red loot zones for one reason or another, and there are sessions where I focus on farming just high density of containers regardless of where they are and how they are marked on the map. I have consistently found more blueprints in the second style of run. So from our own experiences on the channel and the data that I've seen, I think it's unlikely that blueprints appear more often in yellow or red loot zones. I don't think that really has much to do with blueprints specifically. Then there are a couple more factors worth diving into a little bit more, because I have seen people claim them to be facts, and they're somewhat tied together, but in a very odd way. The main thing that I've seen people claim is that certain blueprints are tied to certain container types. I've heard people say snaphook blueprints come from mechanical loot containers because snaphooks are mechanical in function, and that just seems completely to not be the case. We've seen snaphook blueprints in a variety of container types. The only thing that has been the same across them is that it was during electromagnetic storm. I found things like anvil blueprints in medical duffel bags, and I have to imagine if they were going to tie specific blueprints to specific container types, it would not be logical to put gun blueprints in medical bags, because that's where the high tier med item blueprints should go if that was the logic the game used, but that does not seem to be the case. There is, however, one somewhat exception to this, but it's less about the container types in it than it is the specific spots. This being the breach door room in the Blue Gate underground area right below the reinforced reception entrance. From the entrance of reinforced reception, go forward to the ropes, slide down into the lobby, then in the lobby, the door on your right with the yellow marking on the wall beside it, go through that, then there's a breachable door dead ahead of you. This breachable door room is pretty much accepted by the entire community as being the room that has super high drop chances of specifically blueprints for light sticks and blueprints for augments. I heard so many people say this a while back thinking there was no way it could be true, but I started investigating further and I started looking into all of the theories related to blueprints that I saw online, trying to nail down what seemed plausible and what wasn't, and this was one of the only things that actually did seem to have merit to it, and after going to check it a bunch ourselves, this one seems almost definitely correct. Over 10 raids, we found 10 total blueprints in that room. 7 of them were light stick blueprints, 1 of them was a torrente blueprint, and then the other 2 were purple augment blueprints, which personally, the only other place I have seen a purple augment blueprint is from Trial Reward, so seeing 2 of them that quickly along with light sticks, and these are the things that everyone else was saying were in that room commonly, that leads me to believe that this room definitely is an anomaly. It is unique, it has high blueprint drop rates, and for very specific blueprints as well. That said, if you think there are any other rooms like this in the game where you have noticed the exact same type of blueprint or the same specific blueprint dropping over and over and over again every time you go there, please tell me about them down in the comments so we can look into them more, because this is the only one that I have heard of or seen that I think has merit after actually testing it. But if there is one of these that seems correct, it would be logical to assume that there should be more places like this too in the game. That said, the other side of this is specific container types. We're definitely all on the same wavelength, believing that things like raider containers, the weapon cases and stuff like that I talked about earlier, all that seems to have higher blueprint drop chances compared to just random lootable places. I mean, I've looted probably a total of like 20 to 30 buried caches my entire time playing the game, and I have found a bettina blueprint in one of those 30. And this was after they lowered the bettina blueprint drop rate, so it wasn't so common at that point. Past that, again, there's things like people have noticed finding tons and tons of blueprints in the apartment complexes on damp battlegrounds. Even just earlier today, I did a raid where I went through these areas during electromagnetic storm and found 3 blueprints across all 5 buildings, which is the most I've ever had from one raid. And things like that makes people start to think that drawers and cabinets, which are the types of loot containers in those buildings, might specifically have higher chances of blueprint drops, because people have found more blueprints there than they do in other places. But the thing is, I've tried looting other places like this. Hell, most of the map of Buried City is all containers that are the same type of container as these, like through all of the houses, the apartment complex, and Grandioso Apartments is probably the best direct comparison for this, because the Grandioso Apartments is essentially the same style of building, they're just laid out differently. And it's even a yellow loot zone, so the loot quality in there should be higher in theory too, though again, I don't think that actually affects blueprint drop rates. But myself, when I checked these places many times over, and every other player I've seen who runs both of these locations as well, has said that they just get more blueprints in the damn Battlegrounds apartments compared to any other place that has those container types that exist. The end conclusion then, as far as what I'm concerned with here, is that it isn't about the type of container. It's not that drawers or cabinets or desks or whatever container type you want to say it is has higher chances. The only ones that we are fairly sure of are the raider containers. Everything past that, I think, is just people sort of tricking themselves. The reason that the Ruby residences and the Pale apartments on damn battlegrounds seem to have higher blueprint drop rates is, at least in my opinion, because they just have an extremely high density of containers that can drop blueprints. It's not that the location has higher drop rates baked into it like as part of the code of the game. It's not that the type of containers found in those buildings have higher chances necessarily. It's simply that every floor of every building has like 10 to 15 containers that are capable of having blueprints drop in them. 2 floors of loot across 5 buildings, all like that, and the fact that you can get through all of these in a pretty small amount of time, letting you run it on loop very consistently. And the end result is that running those spots tends to get you more blueprint drops than most other places in the game. But the important distinction is, again, I don't think it's because it's residential. I don't think it's because it's drawers and cabinets. From hundreds of hours of playing the game, countless blueprint farming runs in every which way I can think of, I personally fully believe it's just a high density of solid containers full stop, and that we'd have the same results if you replaced every cabinet or drawer with a locker or with a breech box or with a desk drawer, and it was different containers but the same amount of them in the same amount of space. It just so happens that this is a sort of critical mass of loot density in one spot, which leads people to go in here and find blueprints and make big assumptions about blueprints as a whole, spread this information to other people, and the more people they tell that they find lots of blueprints here, the more people will run this place, the more people will find blueprints here because there's more people running this location, and they will continue to say that that is a fact, even though that's not necessarily what's going on. That just about does it for today then, everyone. One day I hope that Embark will properly give us the information on this, even if for no other reason than getting to know if my theories are correct or if I'm just a little bit loopy in the head, but I doubt they would ever pull the curtain back on blueprints to that extent. Instead, the only way that we're likely to find out is with proper data mining done by someone in the community. And while I've heard rumors that people are working on that, I've not seen any confirmed completed data mines. That said, if you do know of any, please let us know, because I would love to be able to see actual hard factual information about blueprints instead of just doing our best to piece together the minutia of the drop rates from player experiences and reported findings. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and hopefully this helps you out in finding the blueprints that you're after, or in the case of something like the Deadline blueprint, just knowing that it can't be found right now too should give you some sort of peace of mind. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.